Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Gowling WLG hosted webinar on strategies to help businesses deal with COVID-19 liquidity issues. For those of you that are viewing this on your computers, you should be able to select the gallery view, which is in the top right-hand corner of your screen. And if it's not already on gallery view, if it's already on gallery view, you don't need to select it. But if it isn't, click on that and you'll see all of the panelists at the same time. My name is David Cohen. I'm the national leader of Gowling WLG's Financial Services Industry Group. I practiced in restructuring and insolvency for 30 years, and I've seen my share of liquidity crisis in companies, and it's my job to help those companies solve that problem. We have very esteemed panelists, all of whom have practiced in the area for a very long period of time. I want to introduce each of the panelists. Geneviève Cloutier is a partner in Gowling WLG's Montreal office. Wave, Geneviève, to say hi.
Bonjour, hi everyone.
Her practice focuses on the areas of restructuring and insolvency, distressed acquisition, banking, and commercial litigation. She has appeared in all levels of court in Quebec and before the Supreme Court of Canada. Scott Sinclair, wave Scott.
Hi everyone.
Scott Sinclair is president of Sinclair Range, a company that he founded to invest in and advise businesses going through transition. That's whether it's high growth or struggling or underperforming operations or in a time of financial difficulty. Scott's also the owner and operator of multiple businesses that have faced and are facing right now COVID-19 challenges. So to the extent you want to hear from somebody who's feeling the pain himself, Scott is a person who's got that perspective. He's also the founder and host of Martinis with Scott, a YouTube channel and podcast directed at strategies for business owners to create winning momentum. I encourage you to take a look at Martinis with Scott on YouTube. Steve Ferguson, say hi, Steve.
Hi, everyone.
Is a managing director at Alvarez & Marsal, one of the world's largest turnaround and restructuring and consulting firms. He has more than 15 years of turnaround consulting, performance improvement, corporate restructuring, and finance accounting experience. And last, but certainly not least, is Tom Cumming. Say hi, Tom.
Morning, everybody.
Tom is the senior restructuring and insolvency lawyer at the Gowling WLG office in Calgary, and he leads that practice in Calgary. Tom has over 30 years of experience in restructuring and insolvency and lending in areas, and has developed a reputation for providing really creative solutions to his clients. Tom's again appeared before all levels of court in Alberta and the Supreme Court of Canada. And for those that might recognize him, he practiced in Toronto until 2001 and then moved his practice to Calgary. So that's the panel. Thank you all for joining and taking the time to participate in the discussion. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about liquidity. That liquidity is more than cash on hand becomes obvious when considered in the context of this financial crisis. Businesses often view liquidity only as cash in hand, but in these times, owners need to tap into many new resources and new ways of finding liquidity for their businesses. Some examples that will be discussed today are obviously cash on hand, revenues from sales, might be dwindling a little bit right now, access to cash from existing or new lenders, they're there to help sometimes, collection of AR from customers or the factoring of those receivables from customers, deferring payments of suppliers while you're still trying to ensure that you get critical supply. There's a significant amount of discussion around government funding and government programs. We're going to discuss that in some detail today. And then you can cut fixed or variable costs in your business, but where to cut and how to cut is always an open question. And last but not least on the list of sources of cash is equity injections. Business owners and senior managers need to make their own decisions about how and if they cut costs in their business. And they'll inevitably weigh in on the social and moral considerations that form part of that decision making. Look, it's not easy to lay off employees. It's not easy to not pay a supplier that you've relied on for years and you have a strong relationship. We all want to do our part in the economy. And that's a big part of, and we see it in Canada more than in the US, that's a big part of the Canadian business ethos. But at the same time, your business is no use if it doesn't surprise. And our presenters are going to have a conversation, survive, and our presenters are going to have a conversation around that. This presentation speaks to the tools that are available to give business owners and their stakeholders the best and broadest choices. The format of the presentation is question and answer. There's not any visuals being put up on the screen. It's just a fireside chat between 5 people who have been in this business for a long time. I will ask a question to a particular panelist, and then it's open for other panelists to provide their own comments. If you have questions as an audience, you can pose them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. The questions will not be addressed until the end of the presentation and time permitting. This presentation will be recorded and it will be put up on the Gowling WLG website and made available to the audience, along with some additional materials that will be linked to it that have been prepared in support of the presentation. So I'd like to turn to the panel and start the first question. Scott, this is for you. Business and social shutdowns have created an urgent need for liquidity for Canadian businesses and workers. How is the lack of liquidity affecting businesses at this point in the crisis?
Thanks, David. The liquidity crisis is forcing very hard decisions on management teams, decisions where there may be no right answer, and they have to make these decisions while under significant uncertainty and therefore stress. You know, everybody on this panel has spent years and built their career around operating at this level of stress and with these exact same issues. But, you know, management teams across the globe right now have been thrown into this fire, and they don't have the tool set necessarily to deal with it. So let me give you a few examples. Businesses are being forced to evaluate whether they ought to be operating or not. I mean, who has to make that decision on a day-to-day basis? I'm sitting here in my beautiful hometown of Fernie, British Columbia, and the other day I went into my local butcher shop and was told to stock up because they were closing down that day. They're closing down for a month at a minimum, and they have no other plans. They're not going to renovate, they're not going to clean up, they're just going to go home and sit in their house for a month. That was their plan. And that didn't happen in 2008. That didn't happen with 9/11. This crisis has literally changed the trajectory of every business on the globe. There's one example. Cash flow. Number 2, it's forcing business owners who have never maybe thought about their cash flow before, and cash flow models and these sorts of tools, is forcing them to go through that process. There is no SME on the face of the earth, SME, a small, medium-sized enterprise, that shouldn't have a cash flow model built to help them decide and make decisions during this crisis. And David, you touched on it on your introduction, but it's forcing, to me, it's forcing moral decisions. You know, the greater good versus survival. Do you lay off that employee or that group of employee when the government in Canada has gone really far and tried hard to create programs to entice you to keep those employees on board? It's very difficult decisions. There's a lot of uncertainty around it. And I think and the running out of cash, liquidity part of this just makes that stress and those decisions much harder. That's my view on it. David, you're on mute if you can.
Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think it's a good summary, but what we're seeing is businesses who have never had to worry about liquidity start to have to decide and make actual decisions on who they're going to pay and who they are not. So that's something that everyone on this panel has lots of experience in dealing with. But to Scott's point, it's unprecedented. In fact, I heard from a client of ours that said that they own a number of malls, that said only 40% of rents were received on time for April. So you're seeing everyone having to go through and make these tough decisions.
Right. Okay. So to follow up on that question to Scott and Steve, what's the roadmap to navigating through a liquidity crisis on a short-term basis? What should businesses do? Scott, why don't you start, and then Steve can.
Sure, thanks. I've got a 3-pronged process for this that thought process for this that I've walked through with all of my companies, those that we own and those that we advise. And number one is, don't forget, we're trying to make hard decisions. As Steve said, do you pay your rent? Do you not pay your rent? And by the way, if you're not going to pay your rent, talk to your lawyer first. That's a really complicated thing to be doing. So I'm not advising that. But to make decisions in uncertainty, what do you need to do? Well, number one is you need to take a position. And what I mean by that is, when are we going back to work, and what does that look like for business? Are we going from 0, you're completely shut down, to 100? Are you going to increment up over 6 months? You have to have a view. You have to have a position. Otherwise, you can't make any decisions. You're just frozen with uncertainty. It doesn't matter if your view is right, because you need to reevaluate that position every single day as you learn more. So for me, I started self-isolating here in my home with my family in around mid-March. And I thought to myself, how long is this going to last? And what impact does that have on my business, on my revenue level? And I figured it was going to maybe cut us back, depending on the business, say 50 to 80%. And by the way, the answer's been around 78, 79, I'm told so far. But I took a position and I said to myself, well, I think I'm going to be locked in here till the end of April, which is 6 weeks. And then my experience in troubled companies and every troubled situation is it takes twice as long as you think. Be conservative, double your time frame. So I said 12 weeks, which is 3 months, which from mid-March took me to mid-June, say the end of June, which I think is looking pretty good as a prediction right now. And so I said, okay, how do I survive till the end of June? And what happens after the end of June? And my view is it's going to be a slow buildup. It's not going to go from 0 to 100. We're not just going to flip the light switch on. And so you need to have a point of view. You need to take a position that you can then make decisions around. Number two is you need priorities. When you can't have everything you want in life, you need to prioritize. And in a crisis like this, you need to prioritize. Here's mine: the health and well-being of my employees, mental well-being of my employees. That's priority number one. Number two is also my employees, can they eat and pay their rent, right? So I want to make sure that my decisions help them pay their rent and buy groceries. And number three is a positive thing that maybe you're not expecting, but I want to use this crisis to leapfrog my competitors by being aggressive and working hard, because I guarantee you all of your competitors are frozen with uncertainty right now. Now, you notice in my priorities, I didn't talk about liquidity. And the reason is because liquidity is not a priority, it's a necessity. When I'm making decisions about, who to pay and who not to pay, I turn to my priorities. Does it help does it preserve the well-being of my employees? Are they getting compensation either from me or from a government program, but can they eat, right? And then am I pushing my business forward and regaining my momentum? And then into the third part, I move into a thought process on operations, cash flow, credit. Operations meaning if I'm permitted to be open in the jurisdiction that you're in, are you allowed to be open? Should you be open? If you're running at 80% or 50% of your revenue and you're losing money every day, turn to your priorities. Does it make sense to be open? So that's the operations side of it. Cash flow. Here's the worst thing you can possibly do is you think, well, this is going to be 3 months, and then 2 months into it, you run out of money. That's not good, and you're probably not going to recover from it. Okay, so you need to plan your cash flow, and you need to build a war chest, because in the end, when you come out of this, you're going to do two things with that money. You're either going to pay back the people you didn't pay, right? Or you borrowed a bunch of money, you're going to pay that back, or you're going to use that money for fees with your lawyers and whoever else you're bringing as advisors to do a formal restructuring to clean up your balance sheet to be a healthier company. You need money either way. So you need to build a war chest through this. You need to be aggressive up front. And then third on the list there, so operations cash flow was credit, right? So how are you going to handle your stakeholders? How are you going to keep them on side with your plan? And so that's my roadmap. My roadmap is take a position, set your priorities, and then review with those in mind your operations, your cash flow, and your credit.
Scott, people are going to be really focused on their cash flow, and it's a natural tendency in business to do that. And like you said, it's the necessity. And I'm not asking you to predict how long this will take, but is it realistic to tell somebody that what they need to have is a 13-week cash flow at this point, or are you talking about doing, a 26-week cash flow?
Well, right. So Right. So the 13-week cash flow is, for those of you that are operating a business and you're not used to that term, it's a really standard industry tool for everybody on this panel, right? So you go to your lawyers, you go to your accountants, and they work with troubled companies. The first thing they're going to say is, where's your 13-week cash flow? So that's a week-by-week cash flow of your ins and outs of cash. And it goes for 13 weeks, which is 3 months, okay? That's great. Every single filing that you see these lawyers on this panel doing, they've got 13-week cash flows attached to it by the accountants. And it's a tool, and you need it. Except here's the problem. This is a bigger than 13-week issue, right? So if you think it's going to be 3 months, well, that's 13 weeks, but then what, right? That you're not going to go, it's not a light switch. You're not going to go from 0 to 100, and you borrowed a bunch of money and you didn't pay suppliers. So a 13-week cash flow is on a spreadsheet, extended out 26 weeks, 52 weeks, whatever. It doesn't matter. Your thinking needs, in this particular instance, it needs to go beyond the 13 weeks. So I think, David, it's not good enough. That's my view on it.
You're spreading, and maybe Steve can step in here, you're spreading your cash flow out over what you do have from all the sources that I mentioned in the very beginning of this conversation. You're spreading that cash flow out over a longer period of time, because the premise that seems to occupy people when they develop a cash flow is they don't think about what happens the day after the cash flow runs out. And so maybe Steve, you can step in and go further with it from there.
Yeah, I think one of the key things we always advise our clients is a forecast is wrong the second you print it, and because you're constantly getting new information. And to Scott's point earlier, everyone should have a plan in place. We're 3 weeks, we're a month into this. If you don't have a plan in place, it's not too late, but you need to get it. You need to get it done. You need to get it moving. So as you think about whatever time period it is, a cash flow becomes a rolling forecast. So you look at what happened this week? How did my actuals compare to what I had forecast? What does that mean for next week? Were my collections greater? Were my disbursements lower? Did I build up a little bit of that bank? Or is that a timing difference? Is that a permanent difference? Those are all words that you need to get into your vocabulary every week as you look at this and extend this cash flow out. Because Scott's made a great point. This won't be a flip the switch. Not only do we have to focus on what happens while we're all in self-isolation, we have to focus on the slow ramp up of the economy coming out of this, which may require further investment that you're not considering. So I want to make sure that everyone on this call is thinking big. And I mean big in terms of long time, in terms of war chest, and in terms of how long it's going to take to come out of this. Because at the end of the day, we use the terminology all the time in our business, which is under promise and over deliver. So if you under promise your cash flow and you over deliver, that's a good problem to have.
Right.
And if I can add to Scott and Steve's point, I think it's important. I mean, the cash flow and the plan, the business plan, is tied up with the relationship and the communication that you'll have with your stakeholders. So once you determine what is key for you as a business owner and what are your priorities, it's really important to keep, communication and talking to those employees and those suppliers and the lenders that you have in place to implement that plan.
Yeah, and I think, David, the other point, and I know Genevieve and Tom are going to get to this, there's a lot of government programs that are still unfolding. It'd be my recommendation right now, if you can, to not rely upon those. I think that we're all really focused on what's out there. If you're sitting there in your home office waiting for a check to come in the mail, it's not a good strategy at this point in time. I think you need to figure out how to be self-sustaining. And if you can, definitely take advantage of government programs. Defer your property tax bill if that's what your municipality has allowed. Defer your tax bill if that's what if you're in a tax payable situation. But don't rely upon government to bail you out.
Right. I mean, we don't.
David, if I could just just add on the cash flows that we've put a free, well, obviously it's free. We've put a template, a 13-week cash flow template on our website at Sinclair Range. So if anybody needs to know what that tool looks like, just go look up my website. There's a post there in the top 5, and you can literally just download a template and start filling it in, or at least get the guidance from it if that's helpful to anyone.
Right. And be realistic. this would not necessarily be the right time for optimism in terms of your cash flow. Conservative cash flows give you, you don't want to surprise yourself, because part of this exercise in coping with the situation is to make sure that you keep your own spirits buoyant and your own perspective buoyant, and don't let that get ahead of you. You know, you win or lose the battle up here, folks. And we see it in our business over and over again. People determined to survive have the best chance of surviving, and it requires a lot of hard work and a shoulder to the wheel. And if you don't do that, if you sit back and you wait for it to happen, it's going to happen to you. You're not going to happen to it. Genevieve, you started a conversation there that we want to go on to next, actually, which is how should businesses approach their stakeholder partners? And maybe you can just talk about who those stakeholders are, and then get into the beginnings of a sort of how you approach each one. And I'm sure every panel member here has a different experience they'll want to share.
Certainly, David. I mean, I think the first step is to determine for each businesses who the stakeholders are. So, you know, we're talking about employees, suppliers, you know, the credit, I mean, the lenders, the shareholders. You know, these are all stakeholders that are surrounding around your business. So I think you need to determine who they are first, and then who is key to the continuation, to the survival of your business in this situation, and to the continuation of the business after the fact, as the economy you know, start rolling again. So in terms of employees, I think it's important to determine in terms of who are key. I mean, there's two aspects. So who is key to keep, I mean, if your lights are on, who are the employees that are key to keep the lights on right now? And then who are the employees that are important to the continuation of the business after the fact? In terms of suppliers, who are your key suppliers in terms of supplying you the products that you need, but also the services that you need, but also in terms of relationship. I mean, as Scott mentioned it at the beginning of this chat, you know, there's a moral aspect that no one can ignore in a situation like that. So, you know, it might, you know, be a consideration in the decision of which supplier is key and who's not. I mean, your shareholders. I mean, is there, in terms of your shareholders, is there an access to liquidity that would be available from the shareholders? I mean, that's another aspect to determine.
It's interesting on the point of employees. You know, who is or isn't a key employee. I mean, many businesses are completely shut down, and I have heard from directly from corporate executives, you know, owner operators of businesses, and from institutions that, you know, they're just not, from a liquidity standpoint, in a position to maintain the employment of all their employees. Think of all those restaurants as a simple example. And they're hopeful that the government will in fact step in, and the government has stepped in. The programs have to roll out, and they're not fully rolled out, but the expectation is that they will. But it was said to me that part of the planning for your employees is not just who's key to keep the lights on today, but who are you going to need on the other side of the V or the U? And because business is going to be shaped a little bit differently on the other side. And so, and we're going to talk about this a little later in the presentation about the future looking, the need to be future looking, but you're always going to have one eye on the future. Tom, I've asked you to look at the question of how you approach your lenders in these situations. So maybe you can weigh in on sort of managing the lender relationship in this environment, and what lenders' expectations are, etc.
Yes, it's what we've seen so far is that lenders are approaching these situations on a case-by-case basis. One of the first questions they're thinking about is pre-COVID-19, was it was it a performing loan or non-performing? Was the borrower financially viable? And if it was non-performing, they tend to look at it, the question much more critically. If it was performing, they will give a little bit more benefit of the doubt. And then they have to ask, is the business fundamentally viable going forward? And what is it going to look like at the end of the crisis, or as the crisis ramps down? They want to know if the borrower has a well thought out plan for managing its liquidity and its comeback, and how it's going to function in whatever circumstances it's in. They look at whether the business is actually critical to the what society is trying to do right now to manage with COVID-19. If it's a food provider, a medical service provider, that's going to be relevant. And as is always the case, it's going to be very important that the lender has confidence in the management team and has reasonable confidence in the information that they're receiving from companies' management. They're going to look at what other stakeholders are doing, whether other people are contributing to a temporary accommodation. And then in terms of where we've seen flexibility to date, there's a variety of approaches. There's been deferrals that have been provided for set periods of time, or deferrals tailored to the nature of the business. They look at the availability of government programs, such as through the EDC or BDC, and whether it would be helpful in the circumstance. They look at whether some interest relief can be provided, although some lenders are actually looking for somewhat more interest, although it tends to balance out because of the reduction in rates by the Bank of Canada. And they are willing to provide things like increased amortization, so that the payment burden is reduced over time. There's principal deferrals that are sometimes talked about, or margining more aggressively in favor of the borrower than they would traditionally. So there is potentially a lot of flexibility in this situation.
Yeah,
I wonder if you're seeing that too.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. The interesting thing is that Tom, for people in the audience, Tom's sitting in Calgary, and they have the perfect storm of a collapse in oil prices, which has a profound impact on the local economy and on the viability of the business, whether it's inside of or outside of a COVID-19. Now, the collapse is related to COVID-19 supply and demand issues for oil and gas, but it has accelerated, and I would say that if that Tom and the Calgary team, and Scott can comment on this because he's out west as well, are on the pointy edge of the deepest problem with the Canadian businesses, or at least the earliest signs of it. I think, and what I've heard from lenders are that there's a lot of patience. Obviously, there's a difference between whether you were already in a special loans unit at a bank or not, but there's a lot of patience. Even with the companies that had trouble before COVID-19, there's a lot of patience. And that is in part because financial institutions have had a significant nudge from Ottawa to play ball. They've had their own liquidity eased and improved through, Bank of Canada conduct, and some of the requirements around OSFI's requirements around regulatory issues for banks. But at the heart of it is, banks want to have customers on the other side of this. But the single best piece of advice that Tom and everybody on this panel have given so far is get your plan together and have a smart plan, because what you want to be is the most credible borrower and the easiest one to talk to about the issue, with who is most well versed in the conversation, so that when you go into the bank, it's not I don't know, what can you do for me? I need another $800,000 liquidity to get through this storm. And managing it by, you don't have to be apologetic for COVID-19. It happened to you. It's happening to everybody. But you will have to apologize if you drop the ball and you're not ready for that conversation. So the advice of this panel, I think, is consistent, that you need to be able to step up and really do a great job on your presentation to the institution and be as ready as you can. They understand very well that you're dealing with, drinking from a fire hose. They get it. And they actually do want to help, because like I said, they want customers on the other side. Scott, you were going to say something.
I was just agreeing with you. When you go to the bank, the approach and the attitude, is everything. If you're a business owner, if you're a borrower, you're going to your banker. Think about being in sales and think about the other party. Think about your banker. Don't think about yourself. Your banker is overwhelmed. They're uncertain. No one knows where this is going, and they don't want to make a wrong move. So what you do not do is show up and say, "Hey, how can you help me?" Right? You do not show up and say, I don't have my 13-week or my plan in place. I haven't thought about my operations. I haven't thought about my cash flow. I haven't thought about putting more money into this and sharing the pain. Just, how can you help me? What are the programs? How can you help me? That's not what you want to do. What you want to do is go with a plan, as David just said, and you want to make a proposal that's almost as easy as yes, no. Here's the assumptions behind it, Mr. Banker. Here's the assumptions. Here's my plan. I need from you 3 months of principal holidays. I want to talk about my margining, because I used to get receivables to 90 days and now people are paying me 120 days. Right? There's my proposal. Yes or no. And the banker may have great questions on the assumptions behind it, but you're not putting the burden on them. You're giving them a way out. So David, I was sorry for that. I was really just agreeing with everything you were saying.
No, I think you have augmented what I said considerably. Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the last piece is, don't expect the lenders to solve your problem. And it goes part and parcel with what Scott and Tom were saying. But if you walk in there and say, I'm doing this and I need you to do this, then that's a much more argument than it is to go in there and say, as Scott said, I don't have any money, can you help me?
Right.
And if I can just add, David, to this point, for those that are already in special loans unit, still make a plan. It's important. Make a plan, and once you have your plan, speak as soon as possible with your banker. The special loan departments in bank, there's people there that are highly experienced with these kinds of, with a situation. With situations that are where liquidity our cash flow are difficult. So still do their plan, still speak to their banker, and still come up with a solution.
Can I dig down a little bit on a couple of other stakeholders here, because I'm actually taking a look at what some of the questions that are coming up in the chats, and some of them are a little bit too specific to the fact situation of the person asking the question, and we won't be able to answer it today. But there's a theme in the questions that people are concerned about right now. People know that they've got a certain amount of cash. They know that they can survive a certain period of time, but they also know that they can't necessarily pay landlords. And they're asking about how to have that conversation. What do they do about a landlord that's hardball? Now, we're not advocating one way or the other for landlords, because landlords are a business in the exact same situation. But if you've got if you're a customer of a supplier and you're not paying the supplier's going to want to have some recourse. what kind of a conversation can you have with a landlord? I mean, if they're not being reasonable, that's likely because they're not in any better financial situation to deal with it, I suspect. Their businesses too. Does anybody have any thoughts on it?
Treat them the same as your bank, right? The law, like, I'm not a lawyer, and you guys are way smarter at landlord rights than I am. But you know, they have a lot of remedies, just like your bank does. Treat them the same. Go to them with a plan and a specific request and a time frame, and don't make it their problem. But remember, you know, as Steve said, some commercial, or I think you said a mall, that 40% of the tenants paid their rent and 60% did not. Remember that you're not the only one, and they want a tenant at the end of the day. There's no good having an empty building. But they're not like a supplier. It's not like you can just choose not to pay them today. So talk to your lawyer, get some advice, and then treat them like your bank would be my advice.
Okay, sorry, I'm having a quick second of technical difficulty. There we go. And then what about, so you said treat them like a bank. What about your suppliers?
Who are you directing, to me or?
Steve, you can answer it, or Scott, you can answer it, and Tom and Genevieve have a different perspective because they're dealing with it on a corporate basis all the time from the legal perspective.
Yeah, I think Scott alluded to this a bit. Your suppliers don't necessarily have a real pertinent recourse immediately other than threat of non-shipment. So when you're talking about critical suppliers, you're probably treating those very differently than you are non-critical suppliers. What I mean by that is, I think at this point in time, if your plan can allow for it, what you want to try to do is you don't want people supplying you goods you can't pay for. So if you move to a, call it cash on delivery, cash in advance basis for things that you can pay for and things that you can't, that you can turn around and sell and not on credit, that's a helpful scenario. The other piece to that is we look at this in this sort of zone and say, you want to try to not make your suppliers any worse off. What has happened has happened. COVID has happened to everyone. They're owed money. I think if your plan can support it, then you try not to make your suppliers worse off, and then that's the discussion point you're having with them.
Right. And in a sense, that's almost like asking for them to park the pre-existing debt and potentially go COD on forward orders, so that or some near COD, probably COD in this environment.
Yeah, the mechanics of it can vary whether you're paying off old stuff and getting credit for new stuff, but the practicality of it is that, you know, you may not be able to afford to pay down old stuff. And therefore you need to have that tough conversation with them, that you try to keep them at least the same plane.
Okay, and switching hats, your customers, which you are the supplier to, obviously. So assuming you're not dealing with the end consumer, but are dealing in some kind of a wholesale environment where you're selling on to a customer that you have racked up a receivable from, how are you collecting your receivables in this environment, Scott?
Well, communication with your customers. We're selling to a lot of big customers, so I haven't had a significant problem in our businesses, but you need to communicate. If your cash flow isn't working and you need to accelerate cash, you can always offer discounts. If you haven't given away the security to your bank, in other words, you don't have an operating line, you could look at selling some of those receivables in a factoring arrangement. I spoke before or mentioned before the idea, if your bank has already margined those receivables 85-90%, then worrying about that receivable only gives you another 10 to 15%. So it's really not a big deal. But the bigger deal is making sure that 85-90% doesn't drop off your borrowing base because the receivable aged past whatever 90 days or whatever your agreement says. So you can talk to your bank about extending that out. And related to receivables, I wanted to mention, David, maybe this is a good time, is don't forget price increases. I mean, I'm just seeing it from the local restaurants in here. In my community, we're ordering takeout. We're trying to help the community as much as we can when they're shut down. but I'm certain that everybody's jacked up their prices 25, 50%. They're charging takeout percentages on top of that. They're asking for big tips on top of that. And why not? They need the cash. And so business is different now. We're in a crisis. Revisit your pricing temporarily and revisit your collection strategy temporarily.
Yeah. And again, that importance of communication with the customers, to actually have a conversation and to be, you know, candid, I assume, about, you know, your particular situation and the need for them to help you as best they can, and that you understand their situation, but you have a situation, you have employees and you have suppliers that you have to pay as well. And, you know, your customer, if you're important to them, again, critical supply issues, if you're important, you've got some leverage.
Yeah, sorry, David, to interrupt, but to Steve's point earlier, it works both ways. If you're a critical supplier, don't extend credit. Just get paid up front.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's all very helpful advice. We're going to turn to the massive question of, and this is for Tom to start, what programs are the Canadian government through BDC and EDC implemented so far? We want to focus on the big ones right now. I mean, there are a few. There's wage support, there's direct lending, and there's guarantees. But Tom, you can put a little bit of meat on the bone for that subject.
Yeah, thanks, David. There's first the Business Credit Availability Program. It's through BDC and EDC, and they're working in conjunction with the financial institutions, the lenders. $65 billion program, but it's still being set up. And there's still discussions over what exactly it's going to look like and how it's going to be accessed, which I think goes to the point that Scott and Steve made, that that plan around not having that operational immediately. From my discussions with people directly involved in these programs and setting them up, right now where BDC is at is that the company can't have been in special loans or be a non-performing loan before COVID-19. They also want to know that the borrower has already attempted to get deferrals or liquidity assistance from their lender before coming to them, and that is apparently going to be quite important. So they're not a first recourse. So there's
Tom, if I can stop you there for a second, because that's an interesting point for people. If you're in an existing relationship, from what I've heard you say, if you're in an existing relationship with a major Canadian financial institution as a lender, or a smaller institution as a lender, or quasi-institutional lender, they want you to go back to your lender for everything, including, you know, starting the conversation with BDC and EDC. They don't want you to try and just go directly to BDC and EDC and get some kind of a subordinated facility. They want your senior lender to manage the relationship first, which makes that conversation that we talked about earlier incredibly important, right? And
yes,
yeah. And the second point, and I'll reiterate it to folks, if you were in trouble before COVID-19, certainly BDC has telegraphed to the marketplace that they're not going to be interested in making loans to companies that they wouldn't have made loans to before COVID-19, that don't meet their credit criteria. Now, there's probably some relaxation in that. And then the third thing is if you were already in special loans, that's an absolute block to you getting BDC and ADC support. Although I do understand that there are some conversations going on around relaxing that in the current environment, but we can't make any promises about that. That's nebulous right now. The other thing is that these programs are not yet rolled out. And maybe you can talk about that a little bit, Tom, too, because where they are in the life cycle of this program, and has any of this money hit the street yet from
No, it
BDC or
hasn't.
EDC?
It hasn't. And there's three programs, two more formal and more formulated. One is the Canada Emergency Business Account for small businesses, covering operating costs. Their 2019 payroll has to be in the range of 50,000 to $1 million, so definitely small business, and it's up to 40,000. The second program is a small and medium enterprise loan and guarantee program, and this is the one that is jointly being worked on by BDC and EDC in working with the financial institutions. And one of the points here is it's for credit up to $6.25 million, but you only get that if both EDC and BDC are participating. And under the program, BDC will provide 80% of the advance component of it, and the financial institution 20%, and EDC will provide the guarantee component in whatever proportion is divvied up between BDC and EDC. There's a less formal program that is frankly word of mouth almost through BDC Capital, where there is a lot more flexibility with respect to what the terms might be. They can be bridge loans, they can be convertible loans, but again, the company must have been viable before COVID-19. And it's a little bit more of a specialty product. It certainly won't be rolled out on any kind of mass basis, but it is there. And then in the agricultural sector, you have the Farm Credit Canada is providing an additional $5 billion in financing.
And I can speak to that just a little bit. I know that we have farm credit matters inside the office that I've seen them as a lender, and they're actively negotiating those kinds of advances now to support the farm community. There's a lot of effort going on to make this happen. People are going to have to hold their breath. It's probably going to be another week or so before we start to see transactions actually take place. That's a guess on my part that it's a week away. They're working toward it. They're having the conversations. The major banks are having the conversations with BDC, EDC, FCC. I want to turn briefly to what the provinces are doing. And Tom, I'm going to pick on you again for a second about what's going on in the oil and gas area with ATB.
Well, it's more than ATB. With ATB, it's a relatively informal program about deferrals, and it's a case-by-case thing. It's not unlike what we were talking about before with respect to other conventional lenders. But there's things like there's corporate tax deferral. The government has funded what we call the Orphan Well Fund levy for a 6-month period, and that comes to a total of $113 million, and they're just funding it. So that's significant relief for the industry. They're funding up to $100 million for abandonment and reclamation by the Orphan Well Fund, which provides an element of industry relief, and there are various other programs, some of which really haven't been rolled out yet. But with ATB, again, it matters if they were viable before or after. If they were in special loans before, it's going to be looked at with a lot more scrutiny. But it's not a showstopper.
And Genevieve, I want to turn to you about Investment Quebec. And you know, the comment has been made to me about Investment Quebec is that they've been in the business of helping Quebec businesses survive to keep employment in Quebec for a long time. The suggestion is that they're a little further ahead of the curve, in fact, in supporting businesses, and maybe you can shed some light on that.
I think that's true. I mean, the government through Investissement Québec has supported business and, you know, maintained job in order to maintain job in Quebec for many years now. So Investissement Québec has come up with a program that they announced a few weeks ago, which is called in French, Programme d'Action Concertée Temporaire pour Entreprises, or Concerted Temporary Action Program for Businesses. Basically, businesses that are eligible are businesses that are suffering temporary liquidity crisis as a result of the COVID situation, whether it's to, you know, supply or provide services to customers. And this program, it's been announced that it will roll out in two forms right now, in a form of a guarantee by Investissement Québec of loans, new loans, or increase in facility that already existed as a result of the COVID situation, or the second way that they announced that it would unfold is by loan made by Investissement Québec. Minimum financing is $50,000. It's the information is on their website. There's a number to call, and businesses can reach out through their local network as well. Investissement Québec. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very helpful, and it's good to know that the government has stepped in that way in the province of Quebec. Steve.
And if I may add, sorry, David, I forgot to mention that businesses, I mean, they already announced that businesses that are actually under CCAA protection or BIA protection will not be eligible for this program. I thought it should be noted.
No Investment Quebec DIP loans. All right, Steve.
Not under that program.
Yeah, not under that program anyway. Steve, I want to turn to you for a little bit of a crystal ball moment here. What do you think the long-term implications of COVID-19 are? We've been beating it around on the prep call for this. You know, what do we look like on the other side of this? Sort of looking forward and helping people plan for the next step in their business.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it really is a crystal ball. I'm going to talk about 4 points that I think personally is going to be impactful. I think even as we ease the restrictions related to COVID-19 and social isolation, we do have a threat of a deep recession. I think that was we were teetering on the economic issues before this. But even if you ignore the amount of wealth that's been lost in the public markets, families themselves are having to tap into lines of credit. They've lost a lot of income, and they're just trying to get by. So the real question is will individuals change their spending habits because of either out of necessity or because they just look back and say, I was spending too much to begin with? So it is going to be a slow climb out of it from that piece. Second of all, there are certain sectors that are going to be irreparably harmed here. We in the restructuring industry, especially in Ontario, have seen the decline of traditional retail bricks and mortar for a couple of years now. There's a lot of these stores that are closed right now that will not reopen. And I think this is a real catalyst for significant change to a lot of these businesses. And if you don't have an online presence, I think a lot of consumers right now are able to consume online. And it really is a catalyst to say, I can do this. I don't need to go out anymore. Third, in terms of how do we do business, this really has been an unprecedented shift in how we work and learn. And really, it's only been 3 weeks, and it could go on for a long time. But it really is a forced. I mean, this webinar is a perfect example. It's a forced test case for online learning and connectivity. I think a lot of our jobs, or a lot of your employees' jobs, could have been done remotely before, but there was a certain stigma attached to that, to not going into the office and not putting your time in. I think this is proving that maybe effectively it can be done from home. And I think also we've seen a dynamic and change in we will see a dynamic and change in business sites. I want everyone to think about the next time they think they'll shake a stranger's hand. And I think that is a real profound thing to sit here and go, will you? And therefore, are you willing to get back on an airplane to travel again for a meeting where you could do it via video conference? So the rollout between the airline, tourism, and just how we conduct business generally, it will really change, I think. And then finally, a lot of talk in all the press about nationalism versus globalism. And a lot of I really do think, especially in Ontario, we've seen it where I've been closest to, that there will be a fundamental government push to increase our manufacturing base again. It's been in a deep decline for a lot of years, and this is a catalyst for change for that, which is, quite honestly, it's great for jobs. It's great for continued supply. It may hurt the price of goods, but that'll be the cost to pay. So I do think there'll be a nationalism aspect to that, but globalism in terms of sharing of healthcare information. I think we've all realized that COVID-19 doesn't care about borders. And so that more we can share internationally about best practices, about treatments, about vaccines, will be global. I really do think that this will take the whole mantra of think local and act global. It'll change that significantly. I think the phrase still applies, but it'll change that significantly.
I think, Steve, I share your view on all of those points. I think the panel shares your view on those points. I particularly take the point about the security of our supply chain and the manufacturing of product in North America, particularly, to be something that in the drive for the lowest cost product to get to the consumer in the big box store has driven down costs to a level below what you would call an insurable value, which is everything you buy has to have some circumstantial guarantee of trustworthiness associated with it. And that's fine for, toys for your kids, but it's not fine for masks and ventilators and for all of the other things that are so incredibly important to the economy, manufacturing, energy products, inputs into our natural gas and oil system, into power plants, into hospitals, into any infrastructure that is the baseline infrastructure for keeping society, keeping the wheels greased in society. I think there's going to be a bit of retrenching on that front, particularly in the manufacturing sector. Anybody else have a thought on that? Because I want to turn to Scott. We have a few minutes left, and then we want to get to Q&A. We're going to run a little bit over, folks, and I apologize. If you can't stay past the 1 hour mark, you can always pick it up and look at it in a couple of days on our website. Scott, just want to ask you for some parting practical tips for businesses, coming from the perspective of not just a turnaround professional and a person who's acted as a chief restructuring officer in innumerable businesses, but as an owner of a business with employees. What is it that you're doing now with the time that you have beyond, preparing for these presentations? What are you doing now in your business?
Sure. So we talked about, I have three main takeaways from this whole thing for my businesses and for anybody that wants to ask me. One we talked about already is don't run out of money partway through this. Do your planning now. Do everything we talked about on this webinar to ensure that you don't run out of money. And two, that you've built a war chest because you're going to need it. There's no scenario where you don't need a bunch of cash in the bank to either pay back what you haven't paid already during the crisis or go through a restructuring or to invest into something positive to push your business forward. And number three, which I don't think we have talked about much yet, which David, because it's not really a liquidity thing, but that speaks to your question, is don't lose momentum. Don't let the fires and the problems of this crisis take over your business or your life. And so how do you do that? How do you not lose momentum, even if your business is entirely shut down? And the answer is to double down on your work ethic and focus on the big picture things that you don't do day to day while you're running your business. So if you're shut down for 2 months, what can you do? Rethink, rewrite your strategic plan, rethink, rewrite your business plan, build your online, this is something that we're doing a lot of in all the businesses, build your online direct to consumer sales and marketing strategy so that you're ready to roll out 2-3 months from now. Clean up your CRM or build your CRM, get on the phone and Zoom and some other platform, say hello to all of your customers, all of your suppliers who are just as vulnerable as you are, and build a relationship, update your website, focus on making it dynamic, do a deep dive into your general ledger. And even if you were making before, I promise you're wasting money somewhere. Do a deep dive and find out where that is, and change your business practices when you come back up. Clean up all of that. This is my personal one because I'm terrible at this. Clean up all that administrative stuff that you haven't done for 6 months or a year that you know for a fact is going to come back and bite you in the rear if you don't have it done. This is your time to do it. This is not your time to freeze. I promise you, all of your competitors are frozen, and you can move past them. You can use this this crisis for that. And David, do I still have 1 minute? I can talk about stress. I know you want to talk about that.
You go right ahead. We've got some time.
I just want to talk about stress and negativity really quickly. Everybody on this panel deals in insolvency and troubled companies, and everyone on this panel immediately sees a management team that is beat up, unable to execute, unable to make decisions. It's a horrible sight. It's sad, and it happens all the time. I just want to give you a trick that I use, and I've been doing this for 30 years, and everybody on this panel has. Their entire career has been under the same level of stress and illiquidity. And the first step to this, to the trick that I use, is you need to recognize that sitting around worrying about this for 12 hours or 16 hours a day and putting out fires isn't effective. You know, there's a limited amount of that time, but then your brain is just, you know, it's in worry mode. It's not in business mode. So what I do is I pick my time of day where I think I'm productive at dealing with the things I don't want to deal with that are negative, the fires, and I limit it to a maximum of 2 hours. And I work intensively. I'm going to sit down for 2 hours, and I'm going to get through all of this stuff that I otherwise don't want to do and consumes my day. And I do it intensely. And in this environment, include your consumption of media into that 2 hour window, right? Don't be sitting listening to CNN for 12 hours a day and freaking yourself out. Put it all in that 2 hour window. And then for the rest of your day, if you're working on 8 hour days, you get another 6 hours, you get another 8 hours, 12 hours, whatever your day is. Focus on positive things. And by positive, I don't mean things that make you happy, but I mean working towards your aim of your business. And I just gave you a laundry list of things that you can be doing during this, even if you're completely shut down, to move your business forward and don't lose momentum. And if you use that trick, it works for me. It works for businesses that I advise. You're more effective, you're refreshed, you're energized, and you're positive, and you're sane. That's how I do that.
You know, it's interesting that you've given quite a laundry list of things that you can do. I've always liked to just tell my clients, stop and breathe. Whatever it is that allows you to breathe, take that moment and breathe. You're not worth anything to anybody dead. You're not worth anything to anybody if you're in a negative mode. You are at your best when you are your positive, building best. And that's what you need to be, even in the face of this kind of a crisis. And great businesses have been saved by great leaders who step up in their businesses and take a positive, can-do approach to it. Yeah, there's all sorts of problems. But at the end of the day, that positivity really drives success. We've had a number of questions. Many of them are very specific, and I'm not going to be able to get to them. But one that was just posed just moments ago was, there are a number of startups in our region, Waterloo, that were on a trajectory of growth, but wouldn't necessarily be viable in a traditional banking sense. They were on angel, friends and family and government funding. Do you have any insight about relief or assistance for those types of companies? And if I could start with this question and make one observation, the government wage support is on the basis of a drop in revenue of 30%, right? What if you had no revenue and you were a startup? 30% drop of nothing is nothing. You don't have a measure to even qualify. I don't think the government programs are aimed at startups that are not in a revenue mode. And so I turn to the panel and say, what does a startup do in this environment? There's not a lot of money for them. There's no debt, there's no commercial credit available to them. There never was beforehand. So what are they doing right now to beyond, going back to their angel investors who all have margin calls on their equity portfolios?
Who do you want to direct that to, David?
Oh, that's an open question. Put your hand up first on that one.
So maybe I'll start off and people can jump in. I'm chairman and CEO of a startup. Well, pre-revenue, maybe that's a better word because we're several $1 million into it. Hemp processing plant in Colorado, and I had a long talk with the primary shareholder, who is not me, on that file yesterday, and he expressed exactly those concerns. And isn't this all horrible? And my real thinking was, there's ample government programs at an individual level outside of the business to meet my priorities, as I outlined earlier, of making sure that my employees are safe and mental well-being, and that they can pay their rent and eat their food. So if you can't afford to do it yourself and there's no business help there for you, you need to rely on the government programs that are there for the individuals. But from a business strategic perspective, all of your competitors that you're doing this startup and you're going to end up competing with somebody, well, they're all shut down, right? They're all shut down right now. Think about the positive side of this. We can complete our plant because we do happen to have the financing. We can complete our plant. We can do our testing. We can do our lab testing. And when this virus clears, when this crisis is over, we're good to go. Otherwise, our competitors would have been, out. It's a burgeoning industry, and there's new customers all the time. Well, this has been an interesting strategic benefit for us, and I see it that way.
Okay. Anything to add to that, folks? Tom, I think we're proposing to raise your hand on it.
Yeah, I think some of the discussion is to what extent you actually need to operate to survive this period. What do you absolutely need to pay to keep your business going? And can you approach the stakeholders that you're going to owe money to for accommodation, not unlike the approach that you make to your lender? It's a similar discussion. People in that situation really have to give thought to what extent can they take this period to shut down and do what Scott and Steve are talking about of strategically positioning themselves to go forward. And they should very much be approaching people like Scott and Steve to help with that planning.
Well, folks, we are 10 minutes over our time, and I think it's probably, we have a few questions. Again, they're very specific, and I'm not going to be able to answer them on this program, but I might be able to reach out to the individuals through our system here and have a quick chat with them. So we'll close the presentation now. I want to thank Tom, Genevieve, Steve, Scott, all for taking a considerable amount of time over the last few days to prepare for this presentation. There was a lot of information shoved into it very quickly. And I want to take the audience's patience with us in listening, and we appreciate you listening. And we wish you all the best on finding solutions to the issues that face you. And if we can be of any assistance in that regard, our contact information is up on our respective websites. And there will be links to all of that information on the Gowling website when this video is actually posted. We will also be posting a chart that summarizes the government programs on the Gowling website, and that will become available in the near future and will be linked to this presentation as well. So again, thank you all very much, and that brings the presentation to an end, and take care.
Thank you.